Good afternoon, and really this is my first time before, formally before CDCs who are in of themselves, yourselves, a strategy for what we're trying to achieve statewide. Let me do this. We're in the formulation of a strategy, but we've got a lot of tactics out there, and what I'm attempting to do in the next 10 minutes is kind of describe those tactics and show you how we're going to make those a strategy, and then ask for some help, as I shamelessly did at the League of Municipalities for several commissioners. Very important meeting as it was. First of all, I am Wayne Bradley, again, business administrator for the Township of Ferguson. My boss is sitting at the table there, and he's taking notes to make sure I do this correctly. I wear several hats in the municipality, not the least of which is planning, zoning, and I do redevelopment for the township, as well as the main job, which is to manage the township, to pull it together, to get our departments collaborating and focusing on targets. Now, when I joined the mayor's team back in 2002, he elected, I'm selected, my planning instincts take over, and I looked and rode the township, and I saw what all of you have seen and what Dan talked about was a lot of devastation, properties that were vacant, buildings that were fire traps, breeding both two-legged and four-legged rodents, and really the beginning of a planning process that started in 2002 with a new master plan. That master plan actually replaced a 28-year-old plan. So we were really at a starting point for trying to pull ourselves together. Now, as those particular components of my job, I see things from those perspectives. So as the general manager, my concern is I have to change those vacant properties into tax-generating properties. I've got to get down there at the neighborhood level and create quality of life. I've got to be concerned about that kind of cancer that's literally eating up our neighborhoods. As the planner and zoner, I've got to be concerned about changing those properties into community assets. The most vital thing that people relate to in their community is, how does my community look? How can I, through great development and good presence of buildings in my community, get a good feel and a good sense about where I am? I also wear a hat of information technology. I'm sort of the database administrator for the township. And what that means is all these ideas, all these tactics have to be grounded in good data. And what I do is I turn data into information, and then we use that information as a knowledge base to inform our decision makers, the mayor who proposes and pushes an agenda forward, the council who reacts and disposes that. There are also decision makers, our planning board, who are confronted with great ideas to do things for vacant land. One role I don't play, and that is I'm not really an economic person, but I do understand the impacts to our environment in terms of the value of properties and how properties move, because they only change hands when somebody is making some dollars on that. And that's one of the tactics that we began looking at even through our zoning and planning, because our planning is that great big blueprint. And I noticed there were a couple of planners in this room, and you understand what I'm saying when you look at that blueprint and you say, this is where we want to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years. But the critical piece of implementing that is called the zoning ordinance. It's your market plan. You're basically adding value to land. And so when I got in here about 2002, 2003, my thing was, how can we enforce and set up a zoning ordinance that basically creates value in these lands, particularly in those vacant lands, which were improperly zoned as an issue. People who would have been interested in buying these properties come in and realize that zoning prevents them from doing it. Then they've got to go through a very expensive process sometimes just to get the properties past the Board of Adjustment, which happens in Irvington to be a little busier than our planning board. That's the crisis that sometimes we miss, and I'll end off with some of that discussion, because I think it's a dimension that's very important to understand when you're attacking and trying to deal with vacant properties. We have a twofold strategy that's emerging from these tactics, and I'll talk about the tactics later, but I want to put this out front. Pretty simple. You do a preemptive set of actions. These are the actions that you put in place to make sure that you don't grow any more vacant land. Now, when I joined the mayor in 2002, we had about 700 vacant properties, including a mix of structures. That represented somewhere around 250, almost 300 acres of land. That was completely a wasteland and was growing problems for us in terms of crime, in terms of the way the properties looked in the township and in the neighborhoods, busying our bulldozers as well as our fire trucks. Terrible things were happening to us, and we had obviously to do something about that. Part of what we did was to pull our enforcement teams together. We are now taking 3 departments, merge them into 1 department to do enforcement, to inform ourselves about where that enforcement is and the kinds of enforcement we need to make sure that we can preempt vacant lands. We maintain serviceable addresses through that system, and we maintain phone numbers. And we are in constant contact with people about the status of the properties. As part of our planning and zoning and this preemption, we have meetings twice a week where we actually talk directly to developers. We're engaging with them at the level of, what are you going to be doing about your property? Why is that property in that kind of bad shape? We also provide incentives, and one of the incentives is the hammer. You're going to maintain your property in that kind of condition. We're going to charge you $250 a year as long as that property remains vacant and abandoned. And we actually borrowed that from Orange because our attorney, we happen to share attorneys, and the funny story is he put that law in place in 2009 for us. We didn't implement it until very recently in 2010. And part of the reason is because I just never had real forces to kind of implement that. But having that strategy in place works. People are now throwing checks at us. The person who has been responsible for getting this program, Melody Thomas, who's sitting right here with me, has paid for a salary out of that. We've got banks out here running to us to take their checks, which we gladly do. The important message we're sending these people is preemption. We will not allow you to have vacant properties in Irvington. We will not allow you to go unchecked and untalked to about the condition of properties. Same thing with our foreclosures. At one high point, we were getting almost 200 foreclosure notices each month. Instead of complaining that we had that many, we turned that around, and these are the people we need to talk to. And we have a database that manages that for us. And again, as a way of preemption, and as I just mentioned, the banks, the RIOs, they are responding by saying, yes, we understand, here we are, here's our numbers, and we'll talk to you. The other important point about preemption is, as I mentioned, enforcement. When we put together our neighborhood services department, we actually took on housing code enforcement, sanitation code enforcement, health code enforcement. And guess what they all do in common? They write tickets and they ride through the city. And so we told them, look beyond the housing or look beyond the sanitation and just do the enforcement. We take that enforcement into a database, and now I can generate through a map areas where we're concentrating all of this activity. And then we can strike up our tactics for that particular area. We're also mixing fire and police actions, not the criminal ones, not the sensitive ones, but where do I have a lot of vagrancy? Where am I getting complaints about generally gang activity? You know, those informal drug entities that Dan talked about. But where are they, and are they in strategic areas, and have we wrapped those areas around with redevelopment? Okay? So that's our way of looking at, really preventing this stuff from really growing on us. Now, I did mention earlier that we had about 750 derelict properties when I joined the mayor in 2002. We had 2 great cycles. In the great real estate market between 2004 and 2006, we actually outpaced that devastation. It did not disappear. It may not even have slowed down. We're still looking at those numbers. But the fact is, we grew faster. That was an amazing statistic. And somewhere, I believe, May, it was 2006, we actually increased our rateable base. And if you are involved in any management or any finance in the city, you'll know that that's where you set your budget marks. We did well and suffered a little bit. We had a national slump. So we lost a little bit of that race. But right now, in this very soft market, Dan, in this very soft market, we're outpacing that again. It's an amazing statistic. People are on fire. And I attribute, again, this to some forward thinking and an engaged mayor. If your mayor isn't engaged, get engaged. It pays dividends. As I mentioned, we're meeting with people 2 days a week. We're talking to them. They love it when a mayor comes down because they're investing their dollars in your city to do things that you want them to do, to build, to get those properties back into some financial shape. So we're benefiting. That's a good one. The other is proaction. The other general theme that we're coming up with is how do we move forward through this? Because we could duck our heads down and we could duck our heads down and say, here comes the tidal wave and we better make sure we've got our gear together to survive this. The important point here is that we look to our zoning and our planning. As I mentioned, it's a marketing plan. Please understand that. If some of you aren't connected with your planning departments, sit down with those planners and talk about zoning, changing the zoning. We have now about 191 acres of vacant lands with structures. That's a big drop from about 300 or so. And that's primarily because we began looking at our land form. The average size of properties, 34 feet in width. That's the average size. That's a buildable size in Irvington. We took our zoning down to 25 feet. We said, wait a minute, if you've got a 25-foot lot, you can still develop in Irvington because we have a way of fitting you into a fabric that allows the neighborhood to survive with people. And as you know, the busyness of people can thwart crimes. Gives us justification for additional bus service, makes us busy, keeps people happy in their neighborhoods. And so you bring it down. You also do some things, people call it smart zoning when you talk in the regional, how to do it clustered and centered. But you got to do some intelligent development, and that is putting the right development in the right area to suit the needs. So I have a 3E program, and that basically is that we're doing effective enforcement. We need to do more education, but we're dead set on doing that. And then that big one called engagement. And that's the one where we talk to everybody, ourselves, our decision makers, our public, our financing people, and especially those property owners who have these derelict properties.